labels. So then I guess the question is, were you just sending your tracks out to labels, or did you know anybody who knew somebody in a label? Did you have a kind of in, or you just were sending stuff out and you got picked up by some great labels?
No, to be honest, I've never done anything like, I've never asked anyone to send my music to others. And I always try to find a way. And sometimes, especially in Iran, like the new generation think that I have somebody who's doing something for me. It's like, hey, could you please help us? I was like, nobody really helped me, like even with the tracks that I signed to Knee Deep in Sound or SciTech or whatever label that you see on Beatport that I've signed with. I just find the right way to send them music, but I'm really persistent. So I just send them 10 times. I'm like, you just need to check this out, especially if I'm pretty sure that the track really is good for the label. So I'm that persistent. I never take no for an answer for it. If the track is not good for them, okay, that's fair enough. But if they don't check it, I do not accept that. They have to check my music.
Okay, so you're following the same way that anybody would send their music. You go online, you do your research, you find that, okay, they like to have an email with a link to SoundCloud, for example, and then you just keep sending to that label until somebody comes back and says, yeah, that's awesome, we've listened to it, or actually, no, it's not for us.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really interesting. I haven't heard of the approach of kind of going back, because most people sort of assume after a period of time, maybe you send a follow-up, nobody comes back, that perhaps they're just not interested. But your approach is actually just keep going until you do hear back.
Yeah, the good thing is, like, you never know who's gonna like your music or like your track. Like, for example, the EP that I sent to Dubfire before that, like, was downloaded by Solomon, Acioplex, Hush was playing it from Dynamic, and then I didn't hear from any of those guys. And then I had a gig in Beirut, and I was literally on my flight back home when the plane landed in Tehran. I just opened my Instagram and I had a message from Dubfire. I was like, hey, that track you sent me, Signals, I loved it. I want it for SciTech. So see, this is what happens, you shouldn't be like, nobody liked my tracks or whatever. You should wait for it. And then, especially if you're signing music, and if you're sending out your tracks to the labels that are really big and busy, you got to wait a little bit more. But at least it's good to hear from them that they don't like it, or they didn't want it, or they think the sound is not right. But sometimes they don't really have time to check it. So yeah, I think that there are different ways for sending music to labels, but it's always good to have positive attitude and respect your sound. For example, someone gets back to you, say, like, this is not for me. It doesn't mean that your music is bad. It's made that, like, it's like colors, someone likes black, someone likes red. So the red is not good, black is not good, or is not bad, This is just a matter of taste,
So that leads me nicely into the next question, which is, how do you get your tunes to be heard on these labels? How has that panned out for the bigger labels? What's the story?
So the way I'd done it was like by throwing parties and booking artists who run labels and then meeting them. And then just after the night, when we're out for a meal, is there any chance I can get your email to send you some music? And then that kind of went from there, really, because I was only booting the artists who I wanted to release on, who I wanted to get in with and understand what they'd done, because I admired their journey kind of thing, or who they were. But other times, getting out to parties of like artists that are going to be playing, who again run labels and DJs and stuff like that, and just kind of getting in the face and just saying who you are, what you're about. Is there any chance I can grab your email and send you some music? Or what I used to do was put all my tunes on a USB, just hand them over with like some contact information and say, if you like any of them, get back to us.
Right. So it's been very much the sort of personal approach more than anything for you.
For me, yeah.
Yeah, and it's old school, but it works. You know, people see you and get to know you and get to have a chat with you, it's obviously there's now a personal connection as opposed to just an email. So getting out to gigs and, you know, like you say, USB stick, or back in the old days used to be a CD, you whippersnappers with your USBs. But that stuff goes a long way.
Because the dance music industry is a community, and it's full of people on like the same background, same walks of life. They're all out there enjoying music. So if someone's going to let you into the label, the bigger labels I find out of the circle, you have to kind of like get in and like show that you're a good person, show what you're about, because you're very rarely going to like release music from someone who you don't really know. Do you know what I mean? I think you kind of need to establish like your relationship with the people and show them what you're about. For the bigger labels, I find if you look at all the bigger labels, there's like cliques around them, and it's like a family kind of thing.
Right, okay. And that's interesting as well, what you said, because you'd mentioned previously about Danny Howard and approaching him sort of out of the blue. Mm-hmm. And this is one of these deals that I think people imagine that the people at the top would be in some way stuck up their own backside.
He's so down to earth, so down to earth. But what he said to me as well, he was like, that face-to-face meeting was like a big thing, because he gets sent so many music from so many people, and sometimes it'll just go over his head. But because I've established that face-to-face connection with him, me and him are like good friends now. So
yeah, and that is the thing. Of course, there are always people who are dicks, let's say it as it is, but that is in every single industry.
Yeah,
actually, most people in this scene have all been in it for years. They do it for the love of the music. They've had amazing nights out. They know what it's like to struggle. They know what it's like to hit walls. And actually, they're largely really approachable, and they want to help people out. Definitely.
That's what I found like that with a lot of people who I thought like, oh, I wouldn't go and speak to him. Like Danny Howard is the perfect example of someone who's like he's just moved over to like Pete Tong slot on Radio 1. So he is like one of the main people for UK dance music. But he's the most down-to-earth person I've ever met in my entire life. One of the things I'm interested in is you've released on a whole bunch of labels, some like top labels, real diversity. Was there a strategy? Were you seeking releasing on those labels? Was it organic? How did that actually work?
So, well, first, like I said, first was the saved scenario. From there, I, because I had the saved release, I knew a couple people, and a couple people started noticing me. Funk Agenda was a guy that I chatted back and forth with a little bit. He was doing a release on Sander Kleinenberg's label at the time, Little Mountain. He asked me, hey, you interested in doing a remix? I said, yeah, fuck yeah. Sander was another guy I enjoyed back in the day a lot. So do I want to be on his label? Yeah, obviously. So I did that one, and then sort of, when I back then, especially when I was making music, I was making it with a purpose. I knew that, I'm going to make this next EP, and I'm going to try to tailor it to 8-bit, because I really liked 8-bit at the time. So I tried to tailor it to 8-bit, and I used, I reached out to Gorge through, I can't remember what the means were at the time, but I just sent him a little message being like, hey, my name's Daniel. I've been on Saved. I've been on Little Mountain. I have these tracks I'd really love for you to check out. Can you take a listen? Which he did, and he wrote back. He's like, yeah, this is great. I'd love to sign them. So each time that worked out, I had another name to shout out in my email, in my intro email to these people. So once that happened, I had the 8-bit. So then I met a fellow producer in Toronto around 2009, which was around this time, Little Mountain Save time. And we got on super well. He was a super cool guy. His name was Sean Miller. He was working a lot with Steve Lawler at the time, which we started making music together. And through that is how I met Steve, which was in 2010. So once I met him through Sean, he liked some of the music that me and Sean made together. And so that was kind of how that one came about. And then it's just, once that, I had 4 or 5 different solid labels at the time. It's like people will pay attention to you if you have those things. as opposed to me just emailing and being like, hey, I'm Daniel from Canada, I have a song here, like, listen.
So what were you doing instead? You were getting direct ins with people, or you were sending demos, but you were able on your email to say, hey, I'm signed to XYZ, right.
It's a little bit of both.
Go. Right.
It's a little bit of both. So, hey, Nick, do you know these guys from Germany? Do you have any email contacts for like Nick Curley or Gorge or anyone I could reach? Or maybe some of my other people that just throughout the industry that know them. So I'd get the intro through that. And in that intro, I would, of course, name drop. But yeah, a lot of it's just through, friends in the industry, like 7 degrees of separation. It's like, that's totally a thing in dance music. Like I could, through 3 people, I could probably get to most DJs. Now, will they take time to listen to the song or whatever? Who knows? Some of them don't. There's been labels I've sent stuff to where it's just like, I literally get no response. That still happens sometimes if you don't have the right ins. So it's all about the network that you have. And, if I have a friend who's really tight with Loco Dice, then I'm not going to send a demo submission to Desolate through Desolate's email. Because I know as a label owner how much stuff you get there and how much of it is actually worthy and what's not. Sorry, guys. So
it's true though, but I mean, this is a great insight, the importance of networking and being able to get the handshake that gets the handshake.
If you can get a direct line to somebody, a label owner, it's always better, in my opinion, than trying to go through the label submission form. So yeah, it's like if you know a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy, maybe sometimes it's hard to ask those favors, but I think that's also dependent on your network as well.
So you mentioned that now you've got stuff like, not sure if it will work on the dance floor. You've got some tunes that have taken quite a different direction. What's your strategy with labels now? So I'd say it's, I don't like to use genre titles, but I guess I would say your sound was what I would call progressive house as a genre. It used to be a lot simpler back in the old days, good old days, probably before you even started writing music, if I'm honest, Mike. But that's sort of the sphere that I would say. If you've now got quite a diverse portfolio, what's the strategy going to be?
Yeah, I think despite me making those songs, I still also do just kind of make them more oh, this is clearly a track for whatever label. So those still happen, and that is useful, especially for like getting the initial contact with the labels, because I think sometimes when it's a label you have absolutely no relationship with, you have no connection, you have to use their demo drop, whatever, it's useful to send them something that's like just different enough where when they listen to it, even if they don't like it, they might like respond and be like, this is cool, like send us some more stuff. But if you send them something that is just exactly in line with their label and it's not also a special song, it's probably just going to get filed into like, well, why would we sign this when we have 20 other people doing the exact same thing already on our label? Not every label is like that. Some labels like to just, push out, copy after copy, whatever. But I think my strategy is more about like connecting with these label owners or people affiliated with the label and just kind of letting them know, like, I can be that person on the label that isn't doing what everyone else is doing if you like this music. Granted, that's a very hard strategy because you'll send it to them and they're like, this is good, but it's like not what we want. And I'm not saying send them something that isn't a fit. Like, I still think it's a fit for these labels. It's just a little bit more out there.
You mentioned earlier about sending the tracks to labels, and if you don't have an in or a connection with them, you have to just follow the sort of the demo procedure. Obviously, you have released on, a bunch of great labels that we typically would put at the very sort of pinnacle, I would say, of underground dance music in the genre. How did you get on those labels?
I think I rarely have had a ton of luck going straight through a demo drop thing. I'll get listens, that way occasionally, or, back in the day I would get listens on the tracks sometimes, but rarely ever a response. And I think that's sort of the nature of going through the demo drop, is that they might listen to it, but if they don't like it, they're not going to tell you that. They're not going to open up their email application and, you know, write you a letter. So I think it's more about building relationships with those labels, trying to get connected in some way. So way back at the beginning, like the Mousetrap record, I got the attention of their A&R via a friend who, you know, worked at a different label but was friends with the A&R at Mousetrap, and like somehow through him got my music there. With Anjuna Deep, it was several years of connecting with different artists on the label in person at their shows, going to ADE and meeting the label owners myself, also working through any friend I had that could potentially connect me to the label. So I think you can do it organically by just, you know, following their social media. You can be that person that is the first comment on every post they make, not in a spammy way, but just as like a very supportive peer. And that will, you know, potentially get your name to stand out. You can comb your network for people who can connect you to those labels. I think there's a lot of ways to get an in somewhere. You can, you know, try to collaborate with someone who's already been on the label. Not to say that the demo drops aren't a good way to do it, because, you know, plenty of people do get signed that way, but your priority should be like, how can I just get my name to this label in some other way before sending them music? I think, or even if it's just like writing a song for some other label that's, you know, similar, telling all your friends to buy it on Beatport and getting it charted to like number 10 or whatever, that's enough exposure potentially for that label to recognize your name out of a box, you know, months later. So it's just, you kind of have to give them a reason to be able to pick your demo out of others, whether that's, you know, sending them a direct email through a friend or having enough of a profile where there's some name recognition. I think the problem with this kind of advice is that every label is a little bit different in how they do things as well. So some labels that are very much a lot of people's dream labels, you know, if you're not like friends with the A&R, like good luck is basically the situation. So, you know, sometimes you've just got to also append your expectations a little bit, and maybe you're not going to sign to one of those labels right away. Maybe it's going to take 5 years, but like that is how it works. You know, you can't expect, it's like trying to be a doctor without going to grad school. Like why do you think you deserve to have your first release ever or something, or like one of your earliest releases to be on that amazing label? So it's a little bit of tampering your expectations in addition to those things I mentioned.
Now you've touched on something that I really wanted to explore as well. Obviously, throughout your journey, I mean, you've been releasing for like over a decade now, and you mentioned at the beginning the just trying to get music out anywhere, and you've become a lot more selective and picky, I think was the term that you've used, as, you know, your profile and authority is built in the scene. What was the tipping point? Can you remember a moment? It might have been the first release that you felt was on a really established label, but what was the tipping point for you where you felt you made quite a big step up, and what was responsible for it?
I'd say the first two big releases I had, which was this Rule the World track and then a track on Anjuna Deep, both of the tracks had a lot of feeling, but the production level was not great. I mean, like, they could have been a lot better. They could have been arranged better, better mix. The drums were sparse. So that's because I kind of just had an idea, got super excited, wanted to finish it as quickly as possible and just get it out there. And I was lucky that they did get signed to great labels because there was a lot of emotion in the tracks. But looking back, I imagine, damn, if I'd created that track now, the way I would have developed it, it would have been much better, essentially, just overall, like from a quality perspective. So after those two releases, I started to kind of slow down a little bit and try to improve the production level, the arrangement, kind of the composition, and just take a little bit more time. But really, it's the last 2 years, like that I've matured to the point where I'm much more honest with myself in terms of, you know, I'm very honest with myself when I look at what I'm doing. I'm no longer like rushing things. I'm looking at the tracks, seeing how I can improve them. I'm going more slowly.
And obviously now you have the experience to back that up. You can obviously see and hear things now as the current version of Rashid that you of course couldn't back then. I mean, it's great as well that they pick them up, and shows, I think, to a lot of people who are aspiring to get on those labels that, of course, the production quality and the mix down engineering, all of that stuff is very important. However, a lot of these label owners are listening first and foremost to the musicality and to the emotion in the track. Did they help you, mentor you in any way? Did you encounter sort of mentors along your journey as a result of getting your tracks out on these labels?
I mean, it's funny enough, not so much. I mean, I never. A lot of these labels, they just kind of took the track, and I'd even notice things after their sign that I'd want to change. Like I'd be like, wait, that kick's too loud. I remember like I had it released on a massive label, and they signed it, and then I was listening back, and this kick is way too loud. So I had to change it and then send them the new version before it got released. But had I not said anything, it would have just come out with this insanely loud kick. So I find that, funny enough, in the dance industry, you don't have that same, like, which maybe you have in other kind of genres where they take it and help you develop the track. I've had it one or two times where certain labels have said, look, can you make like this build up a little bit more, bigger, or, can we change certain things, less vocal? That's one I've had recently. Actually, the label kind of gave me a lot of feedback. And they're like, we like these tracks, but there's too much vocal in them. We want to make it a little bit more minimal. So it's been interesting, but yeah, typically I found that I have to kind of myself be really happy with the final product and be like, I know this is what I want. I'm happy with this being out in the world. And at that point, I'll start to actually demo it. So I sit on the track a lot longer before I send it out now.
Right, totally. And this leads me into something else that I'm interested in. Obviously, you've got to have a bunch of connections as you grow. How did you make those? How did you, for example, get that first release on Anjunadeep? Was it literally just submitting it, or had you managed to make some connections first? What's your strategy for building connections? Because I know a lot of people listening will be in a place where maybe they've sent music to labels and it's disappeared into the black hole of nothing coming back, that can be demoralizing, frustrating, and people can even turn on themselves and go, well, I'm no good, my music's no good. It might not be the case. It might just not have been heard. We don't know. But I'm wondering what your strategy is for making those connections in the industry.
Yeah, totally. I'd say the first thing is it's people, it's surprising that when you do send to like kind of the generic demo addresses, you can hear back. I mean, with me with Anjunadeep, I just sent it to their demo address, and then I remember they just got back to me, and I developed the relationship slowly. So I was always doing that and kind of sending it out just to like wherever you're meant to submit the music. But of course, I agree, even till today, you can often just never hear back. I mean, I have certain tracks that I'm sitting on now that I think are the best tracks I've ever made, and I've sent them to a few kind of like demo addresses, and I never heard back. It's clear they never even listened to it. So it's totally normal, and it's just a kind of matter of being persistent and having grit and just consistently just not getting demoralized. Essentially, like if you feel the track is good, it's not going to be for everyone. That's another thing actually, which is most of my tracks that have been signed to big labels have also been rejected by 20 other labels until it gets signed by, Anjunadeep. Probably like 10 smaller labels rejected the track, and then Anjunadeep took the track. So it's really a matter of like kind of taste, perspective, who's listening to it, how their mood on that day when they're listening to it. There's so many factors. So I think it's just about being really persistent, sending it out. If you meet the right connections as well, great. If you meet people that might, know certain people and can help you kind of get your music heard, over time that develops and you kind of build more personal relationships. But I think that issue of not hearing back, it's just part of the industry. I still have that all the time. I mean, it's
right. And I love this, the persistence and the grit, and the way that I often look about these things across life in general is sometimes it comes down to holding your nerve.
Yes.
Can you just keep going, stay in the game, despite the discomfort, despite the inner dialogue you might be feeling? Can you just hold on a bit longer and a bit longer? And in terms of the connections, is there a methodology that you've also used to build connections outside of hitting just the demo inboxes?
Yeah, I mean, a few, but they come by often by coincidence. Like, for example, like my music publisher and a music lawyer who helps him with my contracts and the publishing. I met him very early on in my career just by email. I'd sent a few tracks, and he had a bunch of connections in the industry. So he started to help me kind of demo out to a few labels and help me build those connections. So you meet people along the way that I think are like kind of open the gate and have those connections already. And it's a matter of kind of building those relationships and friendships in like a nice way. Like, you know, I'm one of those people, like I struggle to ask for favors. So I would never really, like, if someone knows like a famous guy, like Dixon, let's say, I would never really ask them to send a demo. I just would rather find my own way. But it is important, of course, to have relationships and connections with people that can help, and you develop that slowly over time. And then you build a group essentially of people that, you know, support your music and help you get out.
One thing you touched on earlier was that now you had to make a whole new world of contacts because you had none in this genre. How did you go about that? How did you start getting your feelers out into the right people and building your network? Because you're very, very well connected in the scene now.
Well, I did the tracks that I used for referencing at the beginning. A lot of those guys who were releasing the music had their own record labels. So I just kind of started reaching out to those. So I did actually reach out to Mo Turk, and I put a couple of tracks out on his label. Did the same with Monotech, put a couple of tracks out on his label. I even did collaboration with Monotech as well. So there was some, so there's some good connections built there. And then from doing that, then I started getting a crazy amount of remix requests from other record labels that I didn't really know before. But yeah, this is how I met Deep Disco Records. Yeah, how I met Pete from Deep Disco Records. He reached out to me and said that he was really enjoying some of the remixes that I'd done on labels like Kudos and Deep Emotion Recordings, which is Mo Turk's label, and Monotech's labels. And they're like big labels, you know, they've got like the best artists on there and stuff. And they were just asking me to do remixes and stuff for them. The more remixes I put out there, the more remix requests I was getting. So I had to try and find time then to kind of write original stuff as well, which is quite a challenge because the amount of remix requests I get now is insane. It's just I get them all the time. But at the minute, I am having a slight little break from doing remixes to do stuff for Deep Disco and that. But yeah, it was generally just from sending stuff out to the record labels that I'd been using for to analyze the music that I loved. I wanted to try and get connected with them, and fortunately for me, they thought the music was good enough, and it just kept evolving from there. Really.
So you mentioned that you sort of were getting in touch with Mo Turk. How were you doing that? I mean, how was the first contact made? How did you get hold of somebody at that level?
Right, so I've been following Mo on Facebook for quite a long time because I've obviously been listening to his music a lot, and I think the first way that I did it was I went through their SoundCloud page, and on SoundCloud it had like you get the biography type thing, and in there usually the record labels will put for any demos, send it to, there's an email address in there. But I think for Mo, he had a link in there where you could upload a track for them to review, but it was through Labelworks. So they must distribute through Labelworks, yeah. So I uploaded an original track into there. I think it was Dreaming Deeper. I think it was a track sometime last year. And he got back to me like straight away, and he said that he really, really liked it. And within less than 24 hours, he'd put a release date on it, and it was getting released in like a week. he put it out like really, really fast, and I was like, I couldn't believe how quickly he wanted to put it out, because he sent me like the artwork the next day, and he's like, yeah, there's your release date. It's like coming out next week. And I was like, I've only like literally just sent it to him. And he said, he said he's got two or three labels, I think he had, but he didn't have much stuff on this kind of deeper label. And it was more of a vocal sort of style, a bit more relaxed stuff. And he was just kind of screaming out for people to put stuff out on there. So we just put it out straight away. And then from there, that's when you start getting the remix requests and things like that, because you put out an original that people are liking. So they ask you to do some remixes, and the more remixes they do, they just started going, it's off the chart really with how many requests.
So the big lessons there, I guess, are you targeted a label that you'd done your homework and your research on, and you knew your music was a fit for that kind of area. You got it released, and then via your remix work, you've built this somewhat formidable network.